I've noticed that this channel has had very few videos that cover games from the horror genre lately. Or just videos in general, if I'm honest. And certainly not enough from the thriller genre, so thankfully I'm going to be shaking things up a little in this video with just that. Saintmaker, a thriller visual novel from Yang Yang Mobile. If that dev seems familiar to you, that's because this isn't the first time I've talked about one of their novels on this channel before. The first game being The Letter, and when thinking about how I wanted to talk about Saintmaker in this video, I felt that it wouldn't be fair to hold it to the letter in the same way that countries around the world hold their currency to gold, but I felt that it's going to be hard to do in this one since I felt that The Letter highlights Saintmaker's strengths and weaknesses quite well, of which I'll come to later on. But considering that devs contacted me personally with a challenge to cover their latest visual novel in some sort of visual novel redemption arc, and with the conversation basically boiling down to the ending of Limbo of the Lost, where the two fates were all like, "Best 2 out of 3, brother. Very well, brother." Then what I'm trying to say in a really roundabout way is that I'm using a review code for this, so possibly some bias to come, but not really. Saintmaker follows the story of Holly Beltran, a 15-year-old girl who's been sent to a religious convent by her parents. While at first we're not given much as to why exactly she's been sent here, as the story goes on, we start to get hints that there's an underlying dark reason why Holly is here that's so traumatic that every time it's brought up, the topic is also dropped harder than a Chinese spy balloon over a country that it shouldn't be. I will have to spoil this later in the video when talking about another point, but for the time being, and the point being, is that while Holly is introduced to us as a regular, if not slightly chipper teenage girl, she also comes with some incredibly dark baggage along with her fascination with absolutely not Harry Potter. Upon arrival, Holly is introduced to her surroundings at this convent, along with several other people including the acting Mother Superior, called Sister Adira, a nun who runs this place with an indoctrinating iron fist, another younger sister whose name isn't important right now, but is way more chilled out than Sister Adira, and acts like the good cop to her bad cop, and finally another girl who's been sent to the convent along with Holly called Gabby, who has her back up immediately after you meet her, though this is mainly because her reasons for being here are also fucked up. Now, while it's not explicitly stated, it is heavily implied that the religion that's being practiced here is some sort of hardline Christianity, although this is a unique chapter as the convent worships a local saint who, as far as I'm aware, wasn't real. And since this is hardline Christianity, you can be assured that some of the characters get medieval on Holly's ass here, and sometimes over the dumbest shit. In the scene where Holly meets Sister Adira for the first time, the sister chastises Holly for reading fantasy books about witches and confiscates it, comparing fantasy books as being on the same level as cigarettes and porno. Though technically porno is also fantasy too if you want to argue that one. Whenever I come to visual novels like this, where the main character isn't a blank slate for which to project yourself upon, I tend to roleplay the main character based on what I know of them and what the game expects of me. From the outset, the impression I got from Holly is that she's not exactly a willing participant of being at this convent and taking part in whatever this religious retreat is, but she's also putting on a front of being amicable and wanting to do what's expected of her. Thus, whenever Sister Adira and Gabby get into one of the many fights they have throughout the story, I always try to play both sides as best I could, which the game is very aware of, thus forcing me to pick sides. Which kind of sucks really, because I didn't like either character. Sister Adira, while it's explained later in the game, is troubled heavily by something to the point where she's clearly bipolar, being all smiles and sunshine in one scene to becoming a literal demon in the next. This does make her interesting, though not likeable, while Gabby just isn't a good character if I'm honest. It's not like I dislike her, but I just don't like her. She's kind of the stereotypical angsty teenager who wants to rebel against the system and isn't here to make friends, and it's like, okay, I get that, you're under no obligation to make friends here. But equally, if you want to make it your mission to be unlikable, then don't be surprised when you find out that no one likes you. It also doesn't help that her voice acting isn't that great. It honestly sounds like her lines were recorded late at night, and her voice actress is doing her best not to wake up whoever's in the next room, because she speaks most of her lines in what I can only describe as a loud whisper, and it can be hard to hear what she's saying at times. This is in stark contrast to the rest of the cast, however, who actually voiced their characters very well, with particular shout-outs going to Holly's voice actress for some serious emoting that happens later in the novel. Anyway, back to the story. So at this point in the plot, we've got a 15-year-old girl with some dark baggage being sent to an oppressive religious convent to be inducted by a sus sister with some dark baggage, alongside another teenager who's carrying some dark baggage. But as it turns out, the mountain of increasingly piling up baggage is actually the least of Holly's worries, because there's a very real chance that this convent is haunted. As the story progresses, you begin to get the feeling that there's more going on to this place aside from the cult-like discipline, as well as the gentle onset of brainwashing going on here, but we'll put that to the side for another day. As the situation gets worse and Holly becomes more stressed from the day-to-day bullshit that she's having to endure, very weird events begin to occur. Events such as hearing singing when there's no one around, knocking over that one statue in that one scene to temporarily see that there's organic matter held within, only for it to vanish soon after with no explanation for what that was all about, to waking up in the middle of the night to find that her bed has been surrounded by stone statues of praying women. As the reader, one of your first thoughts is that perhaps Holly is just going insane. She wasn't exactly 100% on the sanity meter when she first showed up at the start, and what with all that bullshit that she's had to endure in this place, it's no wonder that we're seeing her get worse. This is just her brain's way of playing tricks on her. Turns out, this isn't actually the case. This place is indeed haunted, and while I won't spoil the exact reason why this is, the way this novel portrays it is one of its strongest points. I previously said in my rant on the letter that these guys have demonstrated that they have what it takes to do good horror, and I feel that a part of that has been demonstrated quite well here. There's this really unsettling and alarming feeling going through this story, and not just in regards to the supernatural side of it. This story didn't frighten me, but like a bicycle with no saddle, it made me feel uncomfortable in my seat for most of it. Sister Adira was a character I quite liked. Well, liked is the wrong word. I didn't like her. You're not supposed to. But I appreciated the scenes that included her because she was just so hot and cold all the time that you couldn't predict her behaviour at all. The slightest thing would transform her from a calm and approachable nun to acting almost as if she was possessed. And as you learn more about the convent's history and how it has a history of shitty behaviour on its clergy's part, you begin to get the feeling that at the very core of all of this is something really, truly and deeply disturbing. Unfortunately, this is where my main criticism of the game comes in. While I won't reveal the truth behind what's going on for you in case you want to play this for yourself, I did feel a little bit let down by the big reveal. In fact, I thought the theory that I made up was actually better than the big reveal. So as the story goes on, you find that most of the shocking and twisted sections of this game are centred around the statues. It's almost as if they're possessed and come to life at night, and that whatever's going on in this place is what's created them. Then you keep hearing about how your religious studying here is preparing you for something, and since it's heavily implied that there are people trapped within these statues, I came to the conclusion that Holly is being prepared to become one of these statues herself, and that when she's brought in for the final ritual, you'd get to see some really dark shit before she fights back or whatever. Turns out that's not what happens, and I felt that this story missed the mark there. The truth of what's going on is also fucked up, make no mistake about that, but the impression and direction that the story was going with right up until the last moments seemed to give me a different impression. I think a dark secret about encasing young girls into statues, and with all those statues then coming alive from their trapped spirits like Five Nights at Freddy's but with added Jesus, was the direction this novel was going in, but each to their own, I guess. There's also a sub-story that's going on the sides whenever Holly falls asleep, where she dreams about her sister Liana. At first it's not clear exactly if these are memories or dreams, and after seeing the last one, my interpretation is that it's a little of both. That Holly is dreaming about an actual event that happened, but that her dream is also messing with the memory. Sometimes the same scene will play out, but then things will happen differently to how they did before, and sometimes there are elements that, if this even makes sense, that aren't real, or at least not grounded in reality, that affects the scene, but would be in line with something from a dream. If you haven't guessed by now, these dream sequences are connected to this dark history that Holly's been carrying with her since the start of the game, and while I could sit here and say, And as the story progresses, you get pieces of information as to what actually happened. The truth is, I'm not going to say that, because it's actually more likely the first thing that you were thinking of. We don't see Liana outside of these dream sequences at all, which means that whatever happened involved her sister. Now all you need to do is make one more logical step and you'll have figured out the big reveal regarding Holly's past. The actual implementation of this section of the story was really good, as it captured the unpredictability of dreams quite well, in that stuff would just happen or suddenly change, but everyone just go with it like it's perfectly normal. I also liked that with the different dialogue options you're given, means that scenes can change a little when you come back to play them again. Characters' perspectives of you will change depending on what you've said in the past, and will determine how much, or even what, they'll say to you. But that is about it. These options aren't game-changing, so don't expect anything on the level of what the letter offered once you finish Saintmaker. You don't really have a reason to start a new story here, unless you want all of the achievements. I've seen people online talking about a secret ending too, but I was quite honestly happy with the way the story ended here. I think it ended the only way it could have ended, and it doesn't leave you asking too many questions, aside from the science of how hauntings work, or what your folks back home are going to say when they hear about all the shit you've had to deal with since coming to this convent. And now for my thoughts when I compare this novel to the letter. Neither novel is from the same genre technically, since the letter was definitely a horror title, while I'd argue that Saintmaker is more in the thriller genre. The difference being is in the atmosphere. A thriller is meant to get your heart racing in anticipation for the proverbial shit to hit the fan, but without going so far, whereas a horror is quite happy to go for the full shitstorm. If we were to compare this to a roller coaster ride, a thriller is about the ride itself, with the highlight being the build-up to the big drop, while horror is mainly about the thrill of the drop itself. Now, the ride overall can and should help towards the rest of the horror experience, but without that punchline, it's hard to call it a horror. Saintmaker does have a few scares, and there's plenty of horror elements here too, but I don't think it goes far enough to call it a pure horror. To give an example, though there aren't that many jump scares in this game, one of the main jump scares becomes your friend at one point. The reason I say this is that while I want to compare Saintmaker to the letter, I also admit that it's not a fair comparison since they're both from different genres. But here's the crux of the matter for me. When comparing the two, overall, I would say that Saintmaker is the better story. It's a far more balanced story which focuses its scope down to essentially just one person, though the story technically gets hijacked by another character who I've not mentioned so far at one point. In the letter, you get little bits of information regarding what's going on when going through each one of the character arcs, or even doing several of their routes. It took a long time to get everything, and there was a lot of loading and reloading to get there. But you pretty much get everything from one playthrough of Saintmaker, making Saintmaker the more streamlined of the two novels. However, this also means that Saintmaker is a much shorter novel in comparison, with many sites quoting its length of being between 4 and 6 hours long, and I'd say that's about right too. You could go start to finish on this one in one sitting if you've got the time. And that's actually a shame, since I thought this was a good novel, and I would have liked there to have been more. But while I think it's a better novel overall when compared to the letter, that's only when we talk about averages. You see, the letter got some parts completely wrong, but it also hit certain nails on the head as best it could, whereas Saintmaker only ticks what boxes it needs to. While I prefer Saintmaker overall, I'm going to, and will still, remember the letter more for all the right and wrong reasons. The letter's scares were far superior, even if you could see them coming a mile away. There was a more varied cast of characters, and it also had this occasional out-of-place wackiness to it, which added to the charm. It has been years since I played that novel, but I still find myself talking to people IRL about it, and I still remember the lyrics to Ash's ringtone. Why do I remember that? These are things that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. Even the parts that stood out for the wrong reasons are still fresh in my mind from that novel, and it's strange to think that while it should have absolutely no reason to come to mind that often, the letter often does for me, but I know that I won't be able to say the same about Saintmaker. I had to replay the game when writing the script because I couldn't remember Gabby's name for the life of me, and that's from a novel where there are essentially only 4 characters. The letter had some really good aspects to it, and some elements that brought the score down quite a bit, all of which stands out and makes it memorable. Saint Maker in comparison corrected a lot of what brought the score down for the letter, but never really reached the heights of it either. It's hard to say what the devs were hoping for regarding this novel, since you want all of your creations to succeed, but considering the length, I'd hazard a guess that they themselves don't consider this to be their magnum opus, and if so, fair enough. If Saint Maker is supposed to be something to chew on for the time being, and experience something a little bit different, but that doesn't require you to throw away your weekend, then cool, this gets a big thumbs up from me. If not, then well, I don't know what to tell you. The only thing that really stood out for a wrong but possibly right reason, depending on how you want to look at it, was this game's use of achievements, since you get a happy little jingle whenever you get one.
Of course.
But you usually unlock achievements during disturbing scenes, and there's nothing more hilarious than getting a rewarding happy noise for witnessing something awful. In conclusion, I've already said it, but considering this was an overall good title, then I'm going to recommend this one. It's a quick novel, it'll be over before you know it, and that's a shame. But it delivers a solid story that will keep you occupied for a while. Unfortunately, this one is also quite forgettable, so please don't go into this expecting the greatest novel of all time. If you are, then keep moving. But if you're happy with this, then I'd imagine you'll have a good time with this novel. There's nothing about it that I'd say is bad or deducts points from it, but it doesn't go to the same heights or funny lows that the letter delivered. But with that in mind, I'm also going to recommend the letter too. Now, this may come as a shock to many of you out there, considering that in my in conclusion during that rant video, I made it clear that it wasn't a recommendation from me. Thing is, I also wasn't expecting that novel to have such an impact on me while I was making that video. Though this isn't a fair comparison to make, Tommy Wiseau's The Room was a terrible movie, but we all remember and love it. The letter isn't nearly as bad as that, but I still remember and love it for all the wrong reasons. And the reason I'm now changing my mind regarding it here is that, providing you've got the time, you'll understand what I mean in how this compares to Saint Maker. The letter does what Saint Maker does, but better, but also fails quite often in funny and memorable ways, leaving you with a lasting impression. Which is something that Saint Maker doesn't do, but enough about a different game. I believe that if you like horror or thriller novels, then Saint Maker is going to keep you entertained for a bit. It's probably worth your time, even at the asking price, though I completely understand if you'd rather wait for it to go on sale or something. It's an interesting story and an interesting experience, but since there's not much of a replay factor here once you've finished your first playthrough, you'll probably drop this novel harder than a Chinese spy balloon over a country it claims to have every right to be over. See ya!